Welcome back, everyone. We're going to be revisiting the work of Chase Hughes. His latest book, The Behavior Operations Manual, is making waves.
Big time.
This was previously a resource that was only used by elite groups, like U.S. Army, intelligence agencies and the likes.
Yeah.
Now it's available to the public. We love to unpack these big ideas that shape how we understand the world, and today is no exception. We're diving into the concept of social frames.
Social frames.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at how we interact with each other and how those interactions are well kind of governed by these unspoken rules and assumptions.
Yeah, and it's really at the core of how societies even function, right? These unspoken agreements, these sort of contracts between people.
Right.
And the interesting thing is it saves us so much mental energy to kind of have these preconceived notions about how interactions will go.
Right. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we encounter a new person or a new situation. We have these internal frameworks, these lenses that we see the world through that are shaped by our past experiences, our beliefs, our values.
Right.
Even our self-image kind of feeds into this.
That's it.
So when we walk into a room or we meet someone new, our social frame is essentially our internal definition of like what this interaction is about.
Yeah.
What is the context here? Are we having a friendly chat? Is this a professional introduction? Am I about to enter into some sort of negotiation?
Yeah. And what's fascinating is how much of this happens below our conscious awareness, right?
Right.
We're not always actively thinking about these frames. They're just kind of operating in the background, shaping our perceptions and our behaviors.
Right. And here's a key takeaway, and this is right from the start. The person who's operating with a stronger or more established frame
Right.
in a given interaction, they're the ones who are often unconsciously influencing the other person. They're setting the tone. They're setting the context.
Yes.
And again, this can happen without either person even being fully aware of it.
Absolutely. This is happening all the time in our daily lives.
Yeah. All the time. Okay, so let's break down how these frames actually work. Hughes outlines 4 components or corners of a frame, and he lists them out in order from easiest to influence to most difficult.
Yes.
So it's like a hierarchy of influence.
A hierarchy of influence, yeah.
If you're trying to influence someone, you might start with their expectations. That's the easiest thing to kind of shift. And then you work your way up to their deeply held beliefs, which are much more resistant to change.
Exactly.
So the first corner is expectation.
Right.
And this is all about what someone anticipates will happen in a given situation. It's their what's probably going to happen is scenario.
Right.
And Hughes links this to the idea of life scripts, which I think is a really helpful way to visualize this. So think about walking into your regular grocery store.
Right.
You have a pretty good idea of the layout.
Yeah.
You know where to find things, how the checkout process works.
Right.
That's a life script that's based on repeated experience. Now it gets interesting. Hughes points out that if you subvert those expectations, if you do something unexpected, you immediately grab someone's attention.
Right.
Why is that?
It's because our brains are wired to notice anything new or out of the ordinary. When something deviates from our expected script, it triggers a heightened state of awareness.
Yeah.
It's a signal that our usual autopilot isn't enough.
Right.
And we need to actively engage with what's happening. Yeah. It's like if that grocery store suddenly rearranged all its aisles overnight,
Right.
you would definitely notice.
Okay, so we've got expectations. Let's move on to the next corner, which is beliefs.
Beliefs.
And this is about what's probably true about this situation is.
Yeah.
And it includes what we believe about ourselves, the other people involved, and the kind of overall social environment.
Yes. Our beliefs are really a collection of assumptions that we make in social situations.
Right.
Assumptions about who has status or authority.
Right.
What kind of behavior is acceptable. What the general rules of engagement are. Think about attending a professional conference. You might see someone with a senior level badge and you subconsciously adjust your expectations of the conversation based on that visual cue.
Absolutely. Okay, so how do you go about influencing or even subverting these underlying beliefs that some might be holding?
Well, the first step, as we discussed, is to disrupt their expectations, do something they're not anticipating.
Yeah.
And then the next step is to really understand what their likely beliefs are about the situation, particularly around hierarchy.
Right.
And the key is to behave in a way that goes beyond those expected levels, but without coming across as aggressive or overbearing.
Right.
It's a subtle art of surprising them and then demonstrating a level of conduct that they didn't foresee.
Yeah. And Hughes makes a really interesting point here where he kind of addresses you, the listener, directly. And he says that if you're too focused on constantly comparing your own social standing to others,
Yeah.
it can actually hinder your ability to effectively control a social frame. True confidence, he says, comes from letting go of that need for constant self-evaluation.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Yeah,
Because when you're truly secure in your own skin, you're not spending mental energy worrying about where you rank in the social pecking order.
right.
Your attention is free to focus on the interaction itself rather than on your internal anxieties about status.
Okay. Let's talk about perception in the next corner.
Okay.
What's true about this is,
Yeah.
and Hughes really emphasizes that this isn't about some objective reality out there. It's about what someone believes to be true through their own individual lens.
Exactly. Our perceptions are unique interpretations of the world around us.
Right.
Hughes gives some really relatable examples.
Yeah.
Like a security guard might perceive themselves as being in charge of a certain space.
Right.
Or a company founder might really value the prestige of their title at a social event. And these perceived facts, they provide a sense of grounding and help solidify their sense of frame.
Right. So how do these deeply held perceptions that people have get challenged and potentially shift?
It's a sequence.
Cool.
First, as we said, an unexpected event or behavior disrupts their expectations.
Yeah.
Second, your subsequent actions challenge their underlying assumptions,
Right.
their beliefs about how things operate.
Right.
And when those first two corners are destabilized,
Yeah.
it starts to erode their perceived truth about the situation and their place within it.
Okay.
And that creates an opening. It makes them more receptive to considering your perspective, to potentially adopting your frame.
Right. Their sense of certainty is kind of weakened.
Exactly.
Okay. And finally, we arrive at definition.
Definition.
What's absolutely true is this seems like the most kind of unshakable aspect of a frame.
It is. Definition encompasses things like someone's formal role, their official title, clearly stated rules, and any explicit authority they possess.
Right.
And importantly, Hughes notes that these are the kinds of truths that most other people present would likely agree on.
Yeah.
So, think back to that event director. Their job title carries a defined set of responsibilities
Right.
and a certain level of recognized authority when interacting with attendees.
And these definitions provide what Hughes calls psychological permission
Yes.
to act in certain ways.
Yeah.
But even these seemingly fixed definitions can be influenced.
They can, but as Hughes points out, it becomes significantly easier once you've influenced those other three layers:
Right.
expectations, beliefs, and perception.
So it's not about changing the facts.
Right.
It's about making those facts less central
Exactly.
to how someone sees themselves and approaches an interaction.
Yeah. The event director remains the director,
Right.
but their reliance on that definition
Right.
for their internal security diminishes.
I love the analogy that Hughes uses to kind of sum up these four corners.
Yeah.
He says almost everyone would agree with someone's definitions.
Right.
Friends with their perceptions.
Yeah.
A supportive mother with their beliefs.
Right.
And only the individual with their expectations.
I love that. That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah, it really kind of clarifies these different layers of a frame
Mhm.
and where they fall on that spectrum of personal to kind of publicly validated.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about how these frames actually interact with each other.
Mm.
One of the key insights from this material is that it's the frames themselves, not necessarily the individual's outward displays of dominance, that really kind of win out in an interaction.
Yes.
This kind of pushes back against this idea that you have to be really forceful or loud to be in control.
Right. Frame strength comes from an internal sense of conviction
Yeah.
and composure, not necessarily from external aggression.
And this leads to the concept of large framing, which is fascinating.
Yes.
It's about focusing on strengthening and expanding your own internal frame
Right.
so that other people kind of naturally find their place within it.
Yeah, it's about creating a space of influence rather than trying to directly control or diminish other people's frames.
So what happens when someone's trying to challenge your frame? Hughes gives some pretty direct advice here. He says, politely ignore power rituals and challenges that are rooted in the other person's insecurity and desire for status.
Right. These kinds of challenges often reflect more about the other person's need to feel secure or important
Yeah.
than about any real deficiency in your frame.
Right.
And by engaging with these power plays, you inadvertently validate their attempt to kind of shift the dynamic.
Right.
So maintaining an unaffected stance, not getting drawn into status games, is key. You know, someone testing your frame is often just trying to gauge their own position
Right.
relative to yours.
He makes an interesting connection to societal evolution here, suggesting that this constant frame testing might even be a way that societies implicitly evaluate potential leaders.
Yeah. It's this fascinating idea that throughout history there's been this constant, often unconscious assessment of who can remain composed under pressure, who can provide a steady presence. Right.
And composure, as Hughes argues, is a primary indicator of a strong frame. Often the person who appears most at ease in a given situation is the one whose frame is subtly influencing the dynamic.
Okay. So what are some common roadblocks that prevent us from developing this large framing capability?
Well, Hughes highlights 3 significant roadblocks.
Okay.
A strong fear of social judgment, being overly worried about what other people might think. A fixation on perception, being too concerned with how you are being seen by others. And deriving your sense of self-worth primarily from external social feedback.
Right. So all of these kind of external orientations can weaken your internal frame.
Absolutely.
And he also briefly mentions self-control as a really tangible sign of a strong frame.
Yes.
Something we can even observe in everyday behaviors, like how someone drives in traffic.
Absolutely.
Self-control reflects an inner stability.
Yeah.
That is foundational to a resilient frame. Yeah. And as Hughes points out, in virtually any social interaction, the larger, more stable frame tends to exert a subtle, often unconscious influence.
Right. People are naturally drawn to that sense of stability and direction.
Absolutely.
In social settings. Now, the parent-child dynamic is presented as a really kind of fascinating illustration of frame strength and how that relationship evolves as teenagers start to test the boundaries of their parents' frames.
Right.
And Hughes notes that for teenagers, the order of frame development is often reversed.
Yeah.
It moves from definitions to expectations.
Right. Teenagers often start by questioning established rules and parental authority.
Yeah.
Then their own perceptions of the world solidify.
Yeah.
Which in turn shapes their beliefs and finally their expectations of what they can and can't do. It's a natural part of developing their own sense of self and their own frame within the family dynamic.
And a really crucial takeaway here is that being too consciously aware of your frame can actually weaken it.
Yes.
It should be an assumed stance, not an actively used tactic. It's about underlying strength, not a performance.
Yeah. If you find yourself constantly thinking about and trying to manipulate your frame, it likely indicates an underlying insecurity.
Yeah.
A truly strong frame operates almost instinctively.
Okay. Now, the source material draws a really important distinction between 2 fundamental mindsets when it comes to framing.
Right.
A competitive mindset.
Right.
Versus a collaborative one.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that contrast?
Sure. The competitive mindset, as Hughes describes it, is characterized by a focus on hierarchy, status, control, social ranking.
Right.
It inherently views social interactions through the lens of win-lose scenarios.
Yeah.
The collaborative mindset, on the other hand, approaches every interaction with a focus on mutual benefit, seeking ways to elevate everyone involved.
And Hughes argues that this collaborative mindset is really the hallmark of a true leader. How does that work in practice, though, especially when you might be interacting with someone who clearly has a more competitive frame?
Well, a strong collaborative frame can actually encompass even individuals who are operating from a competitive stance.
Right.
When they sense that you're not trying to compete with them for status or control, it can create a sense of safety, allowing them to kind of relax within your frame.
Yeah.
Your focus on shared benefit can disarm their competitive instincts.
Okay, so this leads us to a really interesting section. The 5 frames that always win. These are specific frames that we can consciously adopt when our own frame is being challenged. Let's walk through each of these.
Okay.
The first one is the father.
It's a father.
And this one Hughes emphasizes isn't just like a temporary tactic. It's a valuable habitual mindset for navigating life in general.
Yes.
It embodies a sense of calm composure, maturity, genuine encouragement, and a confident authority that's tempered with kindness and stillness.
Yes.
It's about providing guidance and support without being easily swayed by the frames of others.
It really is a beautiful frame to have as a default. This stance of calm authority can preempt a lot of frame challenges before they even begin.
Okay. The second one is the child.
The child.
Now, this isn't necessarily one that we want to adopt.
Right.
It's one that we need to recognize when it's being directed at us.
Yes.
It's someone testing our boundaries
Mm-hmm.
through questioning our intentions, our credibility, or status.
Exactly. The child frame often arises from an individual who hasn't yet developed a strong frame of their own.
Yeah.
They may resort to probing and questioning as a way to try and establish some sense of control in the interaction.
Yeah.
And the recommended response, fittingly, is to engage with them using the father frame,
Right.
responding with a degree of humor, and most importantly, without reactivity.
Right.
Seeing their attempts to test you as almost endearing can actually soften their approach.
Yeah. Okay. The third one is the mirror.
The mirror.
This involves reflecting the challenge back to the person who's presenting it.
Right. The mirror frame can be employed in a couple of ways, either by directly repeating the challenging words they've used,
Right.
or by calmly narrating their behavior
Yeah.
in a detached, almost observational manner.
Right.
And this brings their frame challenge out into the open, allowing them to see it more objectively, which can often diminish its impact.
Yeah.
For example, if someone questions your credibility, you might calmly respond with, "You're wondering about my experience in this area."
Right.
This redirects the focus back to their question
Right.
without defensiveness.
Okay. Number 4, the crazy person.
The crazy person.
This one sounds a little unconventional.
This one is fun.
Yeah.
The crazy person frame involves responding in a way that's entirely unexpected, as if you're operating on a completely different wavelength.
Okay.
This could mean completely ignoring the challenge and shifting the conversation to an unrelated topic, or even responding with something illogical or nonsensical. And it can be particularly effective against weaker frame challenges, as it quickly signals that their attempts to engage on their terms will be entirely ineffective.
Right. So it's like if someone tries to provoke you with an insult and you just respond by asking them if they've seen any good movies lately.
Exactly. It throws their attempt off kilter.
Yeah. Okay, and finally we have the detached person.
The detached person.
This is characterized by a lack of emotional investment or engagement in the interaction,
Right.
particularly in response to any attempts to challenge your frame.
Exactly. You display no reactivity to their disturbances, essentially leaving the emotional burden entirely with them.
Right.
Imagine a black wall, their energy hits it, but it doesn't bounce back or elicit any visible response.
Right. Okay, so when our own frame is challenged, what are some kind of fundamental principles that we should keep in mind?
Well, composure, maturity, and an underlying sense of authority are paramount. And the source material strongly advises against becoming defensive or launching into explanations about yourself when faced with accusations or questions that are designed to try and take control of the interaction.
Right. And there are specific examples of redirecting responses that Hughes gives.
Yes.
Things like, "You seem to feel quite strongly about this," or "It looks like you have a lot going on."
Right.
What's the underlying kind of strategy there?
Well, these kinds of responses effectively shift the focus of the interaction back onto the person issuing the challenge,
Right.
or subtly change the subject altogether. They avoid directly engaging with the content of the challenge itself,
Right.
thereby refusing to validate its importance or allow it to dictate the direction of the conversation.
Right. You're not giving it that mental space.
Exactly. And where you choose to direct your attention is a key indicator of frame strength.
Yeah.
A strong frame implies that your attention is valuable
Right.
and not easily diverted by minor challenges.
Hughes really emphasizes this idea of adopting that collaborative mindset and the father frame as your kind of default approach. And he says that when these become really ingrained, you'll find that specific techniques become less necessary.
Right.
And your responses in challenging situations will become more automatic and natural.
Absolutely. It becomes an embodied way of being.
He even draws this interesting connection to examples of widespread collaborative behavior in times of crisis.
Yes.
Like in the aftermath of a major disaster.
Right.
You often see this incredible surge of collaborative behavior, a strong focus on mutual support and shared goals that overrides individual concerns.
Exactly. And this highlights the power of a collaborative frame in action on a larger scale.
Okay, let's talk about the warning shot. This sounds like a more proactive strategy for kind of addressing potential frame challenges early on.
Yeah. The idea behind the warning shot is to address a potential challenge directly and swiftly at the first sign,
Right.
based on the understanding that most people generally prefer to avoid outright conflict. Now, while it can be a very effective tactic,
Yeah.
the source material does caution against overusing it,
Okay.
as it can inadvertently shift your overall approach from collaborative to more competitive.
Right.
He uses the analogy of puppies and a mother dog to illustrate this,
Right.
where often a subtle correction is all that's needed to maintain frame.
Right. You don't need to, like, go to the extreme measure every time.
Exactly.
And he gives these really good examples of these softer warning shots.
Yes.
Things like, was your intention to be rude? Or did you intentionally say that in that way?
Right.
These kinds of questions.
They offer the person making the challenge a graceful opportunity to reconsider their behavior,
Yeah.
to save face and to align with your frame without feeling overly confronted or embarrassed.
And he even suggests adding a self-deprecating admission of a past mistake to those warning shots
Yes.
to make them even more effective.
That's right. By showing a bit of vulnerability yourself, you make it easier for the other person to acknowledge their misstep. Without feeling singled out or attacked, it fosters a more empathetic dynamic
Yeah.
and makes it more likely they'll adjust their frame.
He even references Sun Tzu's wisdom about always providing a golden bridge to retreat across.
Absolutely. Always provide an escape route.
Now, there's a preventative technique discussed as well called the those types call out. And it's important to always deliver this with a smile.
Good smile.
This technique involves preemptively assuming that the person you're interacting with isn't someone who engages in whatever the negative behavior is.
Right.
So the example he gives is, Jason, I know you pretty well, and I know you're not one of those types of people. Something has to be way off here. Is there something I said?
Right.
And that's framing that potentially negative behavior
Yes.
as an anomaly. It's appealing to their better nature
Exactly.
and making it more difficult for them to kind of continue down that path. And the tone here is really important.
Tone is everything.
Yeah. It should be that of a composed, supportive leader. Hughes also includes in the source material some quick practical tips for both avoiding and responding to frame challenges. Things like making sure to include everyone in a group to foster a sense of belonging.
Yes.
Using aloof body language and mentally disengaging when someone's being rude. Not letting your ego dictate your reactions.
Right.
And offering positive attention when someone course corrects their behavior.
These are all really practical and effective strategies for maintaining a strong and inclusive frame.
Right. So you're making other people feel valued and included.
Yes.
Not giving undue attention to negativity.
Right.
And remaining emotionally detached from status concerns. You're creating a social environment where your frame is more likely to be accepted and followed.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about a technique called pacing their reality.
Pacing their reality.
This sounds like a way to kind of build rapport and gain agreement.
Yeah. Pacing their reality involves starting by validating aspects of the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
Finding points of agreement.
Right.
And essentially getting them into a mental state of unconscious agreement.
Right.
Using phrases like, there's a good case to be made for that, or I totally agree with you on,
Yeah.
can create a pattern of affirmation, making them more receptive to your frame and the points you want to make.
Right.
And further enhancing this connection
Yeah.
by mentioning what they might be thinking as you speak can also be very effective.
Okay. And then finally, we have this intriguing technique of using archetypes to navigate arguments and frame challenges,
Archetypes.
which Hughes credits Dr. Jordan Peterson with being particularly skilled at.
Yes.
So why does this work? Why are archetypes so effective?
Well, the power of archetypes lies in their universal resonance.
Right.
These classic story patterns
Yeah.
tap into fundamental human experiences and emotions. People tend to identify with these narratives to agree on potential correlations.
Right.
And to perceive the comparison as insightful and well-reasoned,
Yeah.
even if they don't consciously analyze why.
Right. So if you can frame a situation within a familiar archetype, whether it's, rags to riches, the quest,
Yeah.
The rebirth, defeating the monster, comedy,
Right.
tragedy,
Oh, the class.
the voyage and return, you're connecting with these deep-seated human understandings, and you foster agreement more effectively than just direct argumentation.
Exactly.
And the key takeaway here is that these archetypes tend to foster agreement rather than sparking further debate.
Yeah. Archetypes tap into those fundamental human truths and emotions,
Right.
offering a sense of comfort, familiarity, and inner recognition. This makes them incredibly powerful tools not only for persuasion,
Right.
but also for navigating complex social dynamics and potential frame challenges.
Okay. Last idea from the source material.
Yeah.
Your new frame is huge.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So Hughes explains that we often form our beliefs about ourselves based on what we observe in the external world.
Right.
When we encounter someone who exudes confidence, we tend to assume they're widely accepted and have always possessed that quality. Right.
And this stems from our fundamental human desire for certainty.
Oh, yeah.
When an individual acts with a high degree of certainty, we unconsciously infer that their behavior must be aligned with a broader social consensus,
Right.
that they have the implicit backing of the tribe.
So the mere perception of widespread acceptance can amplify the strength of your frame,
Absolutely.
even if that acceptance isn't explicitly stated or proven.
Exactly. Your confident demeanor subtly communicates that your approach aligns with a larger social understanding,
Yeah.
adding considerable weight and influence to your frame in any interaction.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive
It has.
into the concept of social frames.
Right.
And the core understanding here seems to be that by becoming aware of these often unconscious dynamics,
Right.
and by consciously developing a strong and ideally collaborative social frame,
Yes.
we can navigate our interactions with far greater effectiveness and intention.
Absolutely.
We're influencing situations not through overt dominance,
But through inner strength, composure, and a deeper understanding of human interactions.
Exactly.
So just to recap, those 4 crucial corners of frame are expectation,
Expectation,
beliefs,
beliefs,
perception,
perception,
and definition.
and definition.
And remember the profound impact of maintaining your composure.
Yes.
Not being overly concerned with, fleeting social status.
Right.
And the strategic value of those 5 winning frames.
Absolutely.
As practical tools for navigating those challenging interpersonal moments.
They really can be game changers.
On that note, here's a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Now that you understand how the perception of widespread acceptance can amplify your frame,
Right.
how might you consciously cultivate and project that sense of assuredness in your interactions, even when you're in new or challenging social environments? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.